I spoke with a man in his 50s. He lived around Boston. He earned a pretty good salary, about $250,000 a year. And he called me asking for advice. I was kind of confused at first because he has a good salary. He also had bonuses and incentives that could take his salary up to $300,000 a year. But the one thing this man did not have is he did not have a pension. He was starting to think about his 70s and his 80s. What would happen to him? He didn't have a lot of family members that he could depend upon. You probably know that most companies do not provide a pension. They used to in the 1940s, 1950s, but instead of the company taking on the risk of giving their employees a pension, they decided to shift that burden, shift that risk to the market, and they created a 401k. And if you're lucky, your company gives you a 401k. And if you're even luckier, they'll match you to a certain percent. But do not get this mistaken with a pension. It is not a pension. It is on the individual to make the conscious decision of contributing 10 to 15% of their pay into a 401k, into an index fund. But the problem with this is when you start working in your early 20s, you're not thinking about investing. You're not even thinking about an older version of yourself ever existing. What you are thinking about is clothes. You're thinking about going out. You're thinking about restaurants, maybe a car. You're thinking about expenses. You don't want to take 10 or 15% of a already pretty much small paycheck. How much are you earning when you come out of college? Not that much. So are you going to be willing and disciplined to take a percentage and actually start investing? If you do this at 18, 19, or 20, then you're pretty much set when you get into your 60s. You're pretty much going to have $2.5, $3 million. But if you're like most Americans, you're not doing this. You have not been doing this. Forget about your 20s. Let's look at your 30s. Oftentimes your 20s are about me, me, me. But in your 30s, you start to get more responsibilities. Maybe you have a mortgage that you're now responsible for paying. Maybe you have kids, babies, a relationship. All of these things, they require resources. They require money. And if you're often waiting to decide when is the best time to invest, that moment never comes. There's always a good reason. There's always a good excuse on why you cannot invest that 10 or 15%. Even if you're making good money, you have a good salary. Let's say you have $100,000, $200,000 in the bank. That's not going to be enough for your retirement. The estimation for how much an American should have when they retire, it's at $2 million. And most Americans, they don't have that. You have to consider that the future value of money is always going to be less than the present value. So what would help is a steady stream of money every month. Money that you can depend upon. When you get older, let's say late 70s or late 80s, you usually have two choices. The first one, usually preferred, is staying with family. If you have family members that'll take you in, that's great. The second one is an assisted living facility. And if you look right now in the Midwest, which is the cheapest region, an assisted living facility will cost you about $3,000 to $4,000 per month. And if you live on the West Coast or East Coast, this could be a lot more. Now, sure, there's Social Security. And regardless of what your opinion is on Social Security, the average person gets paid about $1,700 a month. That's how much the average Social Security check is. And that's not enough. And you know that. So we talked about different potentials on how he could have an additional financial security layer, which is pretty much a pension. How can he qualify for a pension? What you have to realize is once you're in your 40s and 50s, you have a wealth of experience. You do not need to start at the bottom. When considering a federal government job, you should not be looking at GS7, GS9, or GS11. It is feasible and it is somewhat realistic for you to come in at GS13, maybe GS14, could even be higher than that. So let's say he gets into the government at a GS12 and he makes it to GS14 by retirement. The formula for this would be 14 years times 144,000 times 1%, which is a little over $20,000 a year, or an extra $1,680 a month when he retired. Combined with his Social Security, he would have about $3,500 a month. And if he were to live an additional 20 years after retirement, so from 62 to 82, that would be the value of $400,000 in addition. That extra $20,000 a year, that might not seem like a lot, but it is a reliable stream and source of income that's coming in. You don't have to question it. It's going to come in every month. You're getting a paycheck. So you can use that for expenses. And that's exactly what he was looking for. 6 months after our conversation, he had a GS12 in Massachusetts. I haven't spoke to him recently, but I can imagine that he has a peace of mind that he's moving forward in order to get fully vested in a pension. It only takes 5 years. He's in his 50s now, but he'll have that 5 years before he hits 60. Of course, if you start your government career, let's say in your 20s or 30s, you can easily double this pension amount. And then you also have to consider your TSP, which is like a 401k. A lot of federal employees have hundreds of thousands of dollars invested, and by the time they retire, you also have the TSP that you can use. Ideally, I think that we all want to live underneath our own roof until we draw our last breath. But that might not always be your reality. So you have to plan. You have to plan by investing. Not only investing, but look for the jobs that have pensions. Whether that's a police officer, a teacher, government jobs, utility companies, they still exist and they're still worth pursuing. Many years ago, I was at the breakfast table with my grandmother. My grandmother told me, she was in her 80s at the time. She said, I never expected to live as long as I've lived. At the time, I think she was 83. And then I remember her saying, if I knew that I was going to live this long, I would have took a lot better care of myself. And I think many of us, we don't think we're going to reach our 80s, or we don't even think about how life will look in our late 70s. But when we're in our late 70s and 80s and we look back, are we going to be content with the decisions that we made in terms of taking care of ourselves, not just health-wise, physically, but also financially? Do you have that financial security to take you into your 70s and 80s? All right, so if you're still looking for a government job, but you do not know what GS grade you should be targeting, there's a lot of GS grades starting from 1 all the way to 15. If you need help and assistance in identifying the GS grade that best matches your experience, I want you to watch this video next. If you would like to see more videos like this, please click like and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.